There is a cold, lonely space that exists between knowing what you must do and the physical inability to actually do it. You are not fighting a lack of knowledge or a lack of opportunity. You are fighting a strange inert gravity that seems to exist only within your own body. You open your eyes in the morning in your Portland apartment and you know the email needs answering, the laundry pile is waiting, the workout gear is laid out. Your consciousness, your intellect, they are all screaming, go, get up, start. But the body, it refuses. It is a slow, quiet mutiny. This is the central conflict we need to talk about. The quiet, devastating question that so many of us whisper to ourselves in the darkest hours of 3 a.m. Am I depressed or am I just lazy? It's a cruel question because it forces a psychiatric illness into a moral judgment. In a culture obsessed with productivity, with the hustle, with the idea that if you want it bad enough, you'll work for it. Feeling frozen is not just an inconvenience. It feels like a personal moral failing. You see the successful people around you in New York and LA and Seattle, and you internalize the toxic narrative. They are succeeding because they are stronger, and I am failing because I am weak. We've all been told, perhaps by a well-meaning but utterly insensitive friend, you really need to snap yourself out of it. And you remember that moment, the desperate wish in your heart that you could just switch it off, that you could just choose to enjoy your favorite things again. But you couldn't. This is the first most painful distinction. Laziness is a lack of motivation coupled with a choice. Depression is a lack of motivation coupled with a physical systemic paralysis. The feeling of being told to just snap out of it is one of the most invalidating experiences of deep emotional pain. It suggests that you are actively choosing the suffering, the numbness, the heaviness that settles into your chest. But if anyone who has truly felt this immobilizing level of despair was given a real clinical choice to stop experiencing it, they would choose to stop immediately. No one chooses to carry that kind of weight. As a researcher who spent years studying cognitive psychology, I can tell you this depression is not a mood. It is not sadness. It is a complex mental illness that rewires the very structures that govern your thinking, your emotions, your perceptions, and your behavior. When we feel disheartened or downcast and we cannot pinpoint exactly why, when nothing we usually do seems to lift that heavy, dull ache, we are staring into the face of a profound emotional truth. Outwardly, your life might look amazing. You might even admit that on paper everything is great. Yet the dreadful emptiness persists inside. This discrepancy between the outward perfection and the internal hollow space is the core emotional pain we seek to name. It is the loneliness of suffering a heavy thing that everyone else mistakes for simple lethargy. This is a grave mental illness, and to mistake it for a personality flaw is to deny yourself the clarity and the compassion you need to understand what is truly happening within your own operating system. The feeling we are discussing isn't necessarily dramatic weeping or profound agony. For many, it manifests as a quiet collapse. It's the moment you realize you are inside a ghost ship. Imagine your life as this vast, complex vessel. It's got all the navigation equipment, your intellect, your goals, your moral compass. It's sailing on the ocean of your modern existence. But one morning you wake up and realize you are no longer the captain. The engine is running, the lights are on, but no one is steering. You're simply adrift. You see the shoreline, your responsibilities, your loved ones, your passion projects, but you are not moving toward them. You are merely subject to the currents. This cinematic image captures the experience of withdrawal and anhedonia perfectly. You should shower, you think. The thought registers clearly. But then a small, quiet, insidious voice asks, what's the point? You go to work, you sit at your desk, but you find you are unable to focus on the task at hand. The emails pile up, and what used to take 10 minutes now takes an hour, riddled with distractions and a heavy cognitive fog. The mountain of tasks in front of you seems exponentially harder to climb than it did 6 months ago. The hurdles you used to jump over easily now feel like insurmountable concrete walls. This is the crucial difference between normal grief and this shutdown. When a person experiences deep natural grief, say after a profound loss, it takes time to process. Yes, but the purpose and the connection to daily life eventually reassert themselves. With this systemic shutdown, the person often withdraws completely from daily activities. Communication with loved ones diminishes, and a sense of pervasive apathy takes over. The perceived laziness is simply this pervasive feeling of being unenergetic, a state that perpetuates itself. You prefer to lie around in bed, not because you are consciously choosing comfort over duty, but because the internal energy required to do the laundry, to call a friend, to engage is completely depleted. It's often not triggered by one specific dramatic event. It's not necessarily a bad breakup or a job loss that flips the switch. Instead, it is a state of apathy and impassiveness, where the person literally does not care to accomplish a particular goal. They may exhibit what is clinically called learned helplessness, the conviction that nothing they do will improve their situation, so why expend the energy? The key here is that the motivation system, the drive, is not simply being ignored, it's malfunctioning. It's not a voluntary resignation, it's an involuntary power failure. To truly liberate ourselves from the shame of being lazy, we must look at the mechanical failure beneath the surface. We must look at the neuroscience. The core of this systemic shutdown is often tied to a malfunction in your reward system, and specifically the brain chemical dopamine. We've simplified dopamine for years, calling it the pleasure molecule, but neuroscience research reveals a much more complex truth. Dopamine is not primarily about pleasure itself. It is the chemical of desire, motivation, and wanting. It is the signal that says, go, this is worth the effort. It is the engine of your intentionality. When you anticipate a good outcome, finishing a task, seeing a friend eating a favorite meal, your brain releases dopamine before the action. This surge of dopamine fuels the desire to seek, to initiate, to pursue. It creates the energetic gap between the static moment and the desired future. In conditions like clinical depression, especially those marked by severe anhedonia, this entire system breaks down. The gap between knowing and doing is a dopamine problem. You know you should do the laundry. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational planning center, has the knowledge. But the mesolimbic pathway, the primary dopamine highway for motivation, is either severely depleted or dysregulated. The signal that should say, initiate, is silent. There is no energetic currency to pay for the effort. Imagine your brain like a car. You have the map, your knowledge, you have the key, your intention. But when you turn the key, the fuel pump dopamine is not supplying gasoline to the engine action. You are turning the key over and over, generating tremendous internal effort, but the car remains inert. This is why you can lie in bed, your mind ruminating, I need to do X, I need to do Y, why am I not doing it, and yet the physical body cannot launch. The mental effort of the rumination is exhausting, but it does not equate to the motivational effort required to move. Furthermore, studies show that people with anhedonia not only have reduced dopamine responsiveness to potential rewards, but they also struggle with the basic cognitive effort required for planning and execution. This means your brain is not just withholding the motivation to seek pleasure, it's functionally making it harder for you to organize the action itself. This realization is essential. Your laziness is not a character flaw, it is a neurological symptom. Understanding this is the first step toward releasing the self-judgment. You are not choosing to suffer, you are responding to a deep underlying systemic failure. The behavioral result of this dopamine dysregulation and emotional shutdown is what we call the freeze response. We understand the fight or flight response, the sudden surge of energy in the face of acute danger. But chronic low-grade stress, sustained emotional pain, or the systemic exhaustion of trying to function, while your reward system is broken, often triggers a third, less visible response: freeze. When the system is overwhelmed and cannot fight or flee, the body's natural defense mechanism is to shut down, to conserve energy, to become immobile. Clinically, this is related to the dorsal vagal complex in the nervous system, a total energy conservation mode. What looks like laziness on the surface, lying in bed, avoiding contact, staring blankly, is at a deep primal level your body attempting to save your life. It is not apathy, it is psychological self-preservation. This lens allows us to re-examine those 6 signs from the original content, not as failings, but as evidence of a nervous system under siege. You can't snap yourself out of it. This is the failure of the rational thinking brain, prefrontal cortex, to override the deeply ingrained protective survival response, limbic system, vagal nerve. You cannot argue your way out of a physiological shutdown. You can't cheer yourself up. This is the evidence of anhedonia. The neural pathways that process positive stimuli are dulled. You can try the old things, the favorite movie, the comfort food, but the circuit that converts the stimuli into a genuine feeling of lift or joy is non-functional. The attempt is exhausting and often only reinforces the feeling of emptiness. You've lost interest in everything. The direct behavioral consequence of dopamine depletion. The engine of wanting is silent. The things that once gave your life texture and anticipation now just register as cognitive facts devoid of emotional resonance. You can't function like you used to. This reflects the massive cognitive load required just to maintain baseline existence when you are in a state of chronic shutdown. Every small task, taking a shower, washing a dish, requires an exorbitant, illogical amount of energy, leading to withdrawal from complexity and responsibility. The true heartbreak here is that this profound lack of motivation and function often leads to a cycle of self-betrayal. You confess to yourself, "I know what I have to do to accomplish my goals, but I never do it. I suppose I'm lazy." This confession, while honest about the behavior, is inaccurate about the cause. Laziness becomes the hackneyed term, the easy character judgment that does nothing to help us comprehend why someone is unable to strive and put their best foot forward. Laziness is perceived as the problem when it is truly just a very visible symptom of a far deeper multi-systemic problem. By addressing the true underlying systemic issues, we create the possibility for the system to reboot, to heal, and to eventually re-engage with the world. The deepest, most isolating layer of this experience is realizing that your body is keeping the score of everything your mind has tried to ignore or push through. We often talk about trauma as a dramatic singular event. But the systemic shutdown we are analyzing here is often the cumulative result of subtle trauma or sustained high-functioning exhaustion. It's the cost of maintaining a performance, the job, the perfect social media facade, the family expectations while running on a fundamentally broken internal system. The body eventually submits its own accounting. Consider the person with high-functioning burnout. Outwardly, they are succeeding. They pay their bills. They are polite. They meet their deadlines, albeit barely. But inside, they are a vast, hollow cathedral. The emotional experience has been so painful, so overwhelming, or the exhaustion so prolonged, that the nervous system made a pragmatic, if devastating choice: emotional blunting. Emotional blunting is the defensive mechanism where the intensity of all feeling is reduced. It doesn't just block out the sadness. It blocks out the joy, the excitement, the anticipation. You become a dull observer of your own life. This is the quiet intensity of the depressed mind. It's not a dramatic outburst. It's the absence of sound, the loss of color. This shutdown isn't a failure of will, it is a failure of trust. Your system no longer trusts that expenditure of energy will lead to a positive, reliable outcome. It has learned through repeated attempts, through pushing past exhaustion, through trying to cheer yourself up, only to fall harder, that the effort is futile. When this lack of trust becomes physical, it manifests as immobility. You are physically and mentally frozen, because at a biological level your brain has signaled that survival is best served by non-action. This is why simply being told, "get some rest," is often unhelpful. You are already resting, or rather you are already immobilized. The problem is not the lack of sleep. The problem is the inability to move out of the immobilization state. The core insight here is that you must stop seeing this as an internal battle between your good self and your lazy self. You need to see it as a mechanical error in the system triggered by an overburdened nervous system trying desperately to protect you. The apparent laziness is the armor the system puts on when it decides it is too dangerous to participate actively in the world. When we can name this deep pain, when we can understand it as an expression of a survival instinct gone awry, we replace self-loathing with a profound, quiet compassion for the system that is simply trying to survive. We must widen the lens and place this personal shutdown into the context of our modern, hyper-productive lives. This sense of paralysis is not just a clinical footnote, it is a pervasive symptom of the modern empty life problem. We live in an age that demands performance above all else. Success is defined by metrics, salary, followers, property, and constant activity. When we fall into the trap of high-functioning burnout, the pressure to maintain the external shell while the internal core is rotting becomes the central exhausting task. You spend all your remaining energy ensuring no one sees the hollow life you are currently inhabiting. The person who feels too depressed to do anything often experiences an isolation born of this performance. You feel disconnected not just from your goals, but from the reality of everyone else who seems to navigate life with effortless, organic momentum. This intensifies the core pain, the belief that you are the only one whose gears are ground to a halt. This is the modern loneliness, the profound isolation that comes from feeling broken in a world that insists on perfection. This is where the complex, multi-systemic nature of depression becomes apparent. It is rarely a standalone issue. According to clinical models, it often appears concomitantly with other psychiatric problems such as generalized anxiety disorders, social phobias, or a history of sleep dysregulation. The anxiety, the constant low-level worry, is often the very thing that contributed to the initial exhaustion, feeding the cycle that leads to the shutdown. The pursuit of a perfect linear life path in your 20s and early 30s. The societal push to find your identity, career, and partner all at once often overlooks the fact that the human nervous system is cyclical, not linear. It requires periods of rest, integration, and fallow time. When these needs are ignored for too long, the system doesn't just get tired, it revolts. We must stop framing this as an individual character flaw and start seeing it as a predictable outcome of societal and neurological exhaustion. Your body is telling a truth that your mind and society refuses to acknowledge. You are simply out of bandwidth. The realization that your personal struggle is in fact a shared systemic failure can be deeply grounding. It takes the weight of the moral judgment off your shoulders and puts it back onto the system that demanded too much for too long. This is the shift we seek from self-blame to clinical clarity. If the problem is a systemic shutdown of the motivation circuits, then the path forward is not a grand motivational leap, but a quiet, patient repriming of the system. We are not trying to climb a mountain. We are trying to fix a faulty wiring connection. Healing depression, even in severe cases, is highly treatable, and the process is usually cyclical. It moves forward, steps back, and moves forward again. Early holistic treatment can hinder or forestall recurrent episodes. However, for those operating in the freeze response, the question remains, where do I even find the energy to begin? The answer lies in the smallest possible action. The targeted, almost negligible effort designed specifically to give the dopamine system a small, reliable, non-stressful win. We are looking for an action that has high emotional meaning and low energy cost. Here are simple, grounded practices to gently guide the system out of the deep freeze, re-establishing light exposure. Your circadian rhythm is intrinsically linked to mood and energy. Do not strive to exercise. Strive only to get morning light on your face for 10 minutes before 10 a.m. without sunglasses. This simple action signals to your brain that the day has begun, helping to regulate the natural release of cortisol in the morning, which should signal wake up, and melatonin at night. It is a biological reset button. The 2-minute tidy. Do not look at the entire mess in your apartment. Focus only on clearing 1 2-foot square of visible space, a section of your nightstand, a corner of your desk. The goal is not a clean room. The goal is to experience the dopamine hit of a completed task, however small. This proves to your brain that action still leads to reward, breaking the learned helplessness cycle. Physical grounding. When the rumination is overwhelming, the body is stuck in the freeze response. The goal is to gently bring the nervous system back into the present moment. Try the cold water reset. Splash cold water on your face. This instantly engages the vagus nerve, specifically the diving reflex, and shifts the body's physiological state, often breaking the cycle of anxious rumination. It is not a cure, but a momentary interruption. Seek soft connection. When isolating, do not force yourself into a high-energy social event. Instead, strive for 1 minute of soft connection, a brief text to a trusted friend saying, "Thinking of you," with no expectation of a demanding conversation, or more effectively, a 5-second hug with a loved one. Physical touch releases oxytocin, which acts as a gentle counteragent to the stress hormones dominating the freeze state. These are not motivational cliches. They are neurochemical strategies. They are invitations to your system to trust the process again, one microscopic step at a time. The truth is, no one should hesitate to seek professional help. Therapy, and in some cases, medication, provides the necessary structure and chemical support to get the engine running again. But in the quiet hours, these tiny actions are the first gentle taps on the engine to remind it how to sputter back to life. The journey out of the deep freeze is not marked by a sudden heroic return to your previous high-functioning self. It is marked by the slow, quiet return of texture to the world. It is the moment you realize you felt a genuine, tiny flicker of enjoyment while drinking your coffee. It is the moment you notice the exact color of the sky above the Oregon coast, not just the fact that it is blue. It is the moment the melody of a song registers, and you feel the slight familiar vibration of anticipation return. Depression is a complex, multi-systemic disease. Its truth has been elusive because the experience is so isolating and so often mislabeled. But now we have given language to the pain you may have never known how to name. You understand that the perceived laziness is simply a symptom, a consequence of an overtaxed protective system. The work is not about becoming positive or motivated. The work is about creating a safer internal and external environment where your nervous system feels it has permission to stand down from the constant survival alert. It is about patiently waiting for the dimmer switch to unstick and for the slightest hint of light to reappear. Do not judge the speed of your recovery. A ship that has been adrift for months cannot simply snap back to full speed. it needs careful recalibration. The most profound insight you can take away today is this. You are not fighting a lack of character. You are nursing a deep systemic wound. The healing process begins the moment you exchange self-criticism for compassion and moral judgment for clinical clarity. If you recognize these symptoms, whether in yourself or a loved one, please understand that this is not a personal failure, but a signal that your system needs professional, holistic attention. The truth is, even in the deepest silence, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. But the first most necessary step is to stop fighting the darkness and simply finally listen to the silence of yourself. The first act of recovery is not action but acceptance.